Welcome back, everyone. Next, we have Vivani Medical, Inc. It trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol VANI, and through leveraging of its proprietary NanoPortal platform, develops biopharmaceutical implants designed to deliver drug molecules steadily over an extended period of time with the goal of guaranteeing adherence and potentially to improve tolerance to their medication. Today, we'll be speaking with Dr. Adam Mendelsohn, has served as CEO of Vivani Medical since 2022 merger that transitioned Vivani to a NASDAQ-listed company. Prior to the 2022 merger, Dr. Mendelsohn was a co-founder and CEO of Nano Precision Medical, setting the strategic vision for the company since 2011. Dr. Mendelsohn received his PhD in bioengineering at the UC San Francisco-UC Berkeley Joint Graduate Group in bioengineering. His expertise in bioengineering has made possible the extraordinary technology advancements you'll hear from him today. Adam, it's an honor to meet you today. Welcome to the conference.
Thank you, Anna. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here.
All right, so the floor is yours. Please call me back if you're ready for questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, thank you for the very kind introduction. I am excited to be here today to share the story of Vivani Medical and what we are doing to try to make chronic disease treatments easier, more convenient, and potentially more tolerable, starting with the GLP-1 treatments for weight loss and diabetes that have gained a lot of mainstream attention recently with brand names such as Ozempic and Wegovy. What we're trying to do, think of Ozempic-like efficacy, but with an administration once every 6 months instead of once a week. And I'll tell you about the technology, about our pipeline, and about how we are working to achieve that goal. So first, I'll just briefly touch on the really incredible leadership team that we've assembled. Each of these individuals have decades of successful experience developing drug products, device products, and drug-device combination products, such as the drug implant under development here at Vivani Medical. It's really outstanding to be able to work with such accomplished individuals to help us execute on our plans successfully. Now, as Anna mentioned at the beginning, we are a biopharmaceutical company. We're developing miniature, ultra-long-acting drug implants, and we're motivated to do this because of the large challenges with medication non-adherence. Only about 50% of people in the real world take their medicines as prescribed. And as a result, there is a very large gap in translation of incredible clinical trial results to the real world. And people are not receiving the full potential benefits of these medicines. And in the case of certain drugs, such as GLP-1 agonists, when there is a rapid rise in the exposure level, it can lead to the gastrointestinal events, which represent the largest complaint associated with these types of treatments. And by providing a very steady, minimally fluctuating exposure level enabled by our technology that I'll tell you about shortly, we think we may be able to improve tolerability and thereby addressing not only the medication adherence issues that are widespread, but also the tolerability issues. Now, on medication adherence, there is about $500 billion in avoidable healthcare expenses on an annual basis in the United States, and about 125,000 avoidable patient deaths in the US per year that can be attributed to medication adherence. So this is a very large problem that we are addressing. Our lead program, NPM-115, utilizes a miniature 6-month GLP-1 implant that is under development for chronic weight management in obese and overweight patients. And this is going to be most of what I talk about today. It's our lead program. We're very excited about it. We've generated some very compelling preclinical data, and we're about to enter clinical trials later this year. But our pipeline also does include a program evaluating a similar implant, but in patients with type 2 diabetes that has already received FDA IND clearance to begin human testing, as well as NPM-139, which is exploring a different GLP-1 molecule, which has shown the potential of once yearly dosing, which would be even better than once every 6 months. We're well positioned to advance these programs as we move forward, and we think generate a lot of value as we proceed. Just a recap of the pipeline, these markets that we're addressing really have significant potential. If you were paying attention, just yesterday, Novo Nordisk's CEO was part of a congressional hearing talking about how much money they're making on their GLP-1 products. This class generated revenues exceeding $40 billion last year, and is rapidly growing, hence the expected market size of obesity products that are around GLP-1 agonists being over $60 billion by 2030, the same for type 2 diabetes, not to mention all of the other potential indications that GLP-1 agonists have been showing promise to address, including cardiovascular disease, which is already on the label of some of the GLP-1 products, but also liver disease, kidney disease, addiction treatment, even Alzheimer's is showing some potential promise. As we proceed into the clinic with these implants, we should be well positioned to take advantage of any additional phase 3 hits that may occur with these products, particularly for the patients that would have difficulty adhering to medication, including and especially Alzheimer's, but actually across all of the chronic diseases. Now, the product is a titanium reservoir, and I'll kind of show this, and you can see how small it is, but it's a titanium reservoir that will be placed under the skin in an outpatient procedure in the upper arm, at least in our first clinical study. This is the same location where well-adopted contraception implants have been placed for a long time, with the current procedures being associated with very few complications. The implant will be loaded into an applicator tool that you see on the bottom right of the screen. And after a little local anesthetic, the tool will enable insertion of the implant. The needle that inserts the implant will be retracted while the implant is held in position, and in an outpatient procedure that nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, and physicians can perform in just a few minutes. The technology that underlies this product we call NanoPortal, and when the product is fully assembled, as you can see on the right, there's the titanium reservoir, there's a high concentration drug formulation, there's a material in gold which represents millions of titanium oxide nanotubes that are adjacently attached and vertically oriented. And when the product is fully assembled, the only path for the drug molecules in the reservoir to leave is through the inner diameter of each of these nanotubes. And to give you a sense of scale, if the inner diameter was about the size of a golf ball, the length of each nanotube would be about 10 stories tall. So there is a very long, narrow path that these drugs have to traverse to be able to leave the reservoir and become available. Now, as grown, these nanotubes have an opening of about 30 nanometers in size. And what we've been able to do is control that size to be on the order of individual drug molecules using a process called atomic layer deposition, where we can take that 30 nanometer opening, and to give you another sense of scale, width of a human hair is 100,000 nanometers. But take this 30 nanometer opening and one atomic layer at a time deposit titanium oxide to bring that inner diameter all the way down to 0 nanometers or anywhere in between with extreme precision over the average pore size. Now, because titanium oxide is a both biocompatible and biostable material, this is what enabled this invention to be applicable in a robust way to a subdermal implant, as opposed to other materials which had been evaluated in the past, and enables us to proceed with what we are working on. And we're very excited. We've shown in vitro and in vivo data that we can get substantially constant release utilizing this approach. Here is some of the in vitro data. I'll show you some more later in the presentation with a couple of different doses showing substantially constant release on the left of the slide, in the case of the lower dose, out to a full 6-month duration of time. And on the right half of the slide, this demonstrates how smooth the release profile is. These are individual device release curves where we've looked at intervals as short as 2.5 hours. And these changes are within the measurement error of our assay and demonstrate really smooth release. Again, this is critical for drugs like GLP-1 agonists, where changes in the exposure can be responsible for tolerability issues. We're very encouraged by this data, and we look forward to the signals that we see in the clinical studies coming ahead. Now, while we are first applying this technology to GLP-1 agonists for obvious reasons, based on the large potential market and ability to have a large impact on patients. There is a drug delivery technology that underlies these products, which we intend to eventually build out as a platform. And this, we can configure the size of the implant, the concentration of the formulation. We can change the number of nanotubes that are accessible, which changes the rate up or down. And we can tune the profile of the delivery by adjusting the size of each of the nanotubes to accommodate a variety of different drug molecules. And while we're focused on specifically exenatide and semaglutide initially, we are looking at how we can apply this technology to the dual and triple agonist products in the GLP-1 space, as well in farther into the future across other disease areas that could benefit from long-term delivery. But with that said, and I'll quickly mention some of the device technology improvements that we've made over other subdermal implants that have attempted to find a path forward with the GLP-1 agonists. Really, the technology that we have is specifically designed to address some of the challenges that other technologies, such as osmotic pump technologies, have faced in getting regulatory approval. And this comes back to the smooth delivery profile that our technology has been able to demonstrate. There was another company that developed a 6-month exenatide implant, which at one time raised over $2 billion in investor capital at valuations exceeding $4 billion at one point, that was unable to obtain FDA approval because the FDA linked daily variations in the drug release, specifically irregular and uncontrolled release of the compound, to some signals that they saw in the clinical studies. And this is all based on public documents, and there was a big public hearing that happened last year. But now that we have that information, the non-fluctuating release enabled by our technology, which directly addresses that challenge, gives us a path forward to obtain an approval and address the same gigantic market opportunity that Intarcia was attempting to address, which makes us very excited about our future. Now our lead program, NPM-115, which is a high-dose exenatide implant for chronic weight management, is addressing, as I've mentioned, a very large unmet need. There are a very large and growing number of people who are living with obesity, a very small percentage who are taking medication for their obesity, and GLP-1 treatment is increasingly demonstrating effectiveness at being able to help these patients so long as they get the medicine, and our implant provides them with an opportunity to do so. They have to stay on therapy for long enough to be able to realize the value and the health benefits of the treatment. And one of the big challenges is that really only a few people actually stay on therapy out to 1 or 2 years after they initiate. Semaglutide, as an example, which is the drug in Ozempic and Wegovy, after 1 year of treatment, only about 40% of patients remain on therapy. And now this was touted as a big advance over the older generation weight loss drugs, where combined only about 13% stayed on therapy 1 year later. But the way we see it is that there are still 60% of patients that discontinued in that first year who we could try to help. Now, since this slide was prepared, a more recent study has demonstrated that after 2 years, less than a quarter of people on semaglutide treatment are still on therapy. And when people discontinue, the weight comes back, the potential health benefits turn around, and payers don't realize the benefits of longer-term maintenance with these therapies, unfortunately. And we think that an implant being an option that physicians and patients can select based on the circumstances of the patient will be attractive to a compelling number of patients. And to give some reference for that, in the contraception implant world, about 10% of women who are on contraception therapy are on a very long-acting treatment, such as an IUD or a subdermal implant, and it's split about 50-50 between the two. So we're very excited that we can address a major unmet need in the treatment of obesity with the implant that we're developing. Now, earlier this year, we announced some very compelling preclinical weight loss data where we demonstrated comparable weight loss to Ozempic, where these high-fat diet-induced obese mice lost about 20% of their weight after a 28-day treatment period. You can see the time-based weight loss on the right half of the screen. And one of the things that this study demonstrated is after a couple of weeks, we removed implants from a few of the animals, and we saw how quickly that weight came back. And this is consistent with what happens in the human studies as well when people discontinue treatment. So this was very encouraging data that we believe puts an exenatide implant into a position where it could have Ozempic-like efficacy when we study the product in humans. Now, more recently, we announced some data after we took the exenatide implant and the sham implant from the same study that I just shared data with out for a total of a 12-week duration. And we saw a very significant reduction in the liver fat of these mice, about an 82% reduction, about 5% liver fat remained in the exenatide implant treated mice versus 30% in the sham implant treated mice. Now, we know that semaglutide is being evaluated for MASH treatment right now, and we're following that study closely to see whether there's an opportunity to expand the potential indication space for our exenatide implant beyond weight loss and diabetes. In addition, we've demonstrated data in healthy rats where we used a single implant out for 4 months, and we saw continued weight loss over that entire duration. And importantly, because there was a recovery arm in this study, we removed the implants at the end of that 4-month period, and we see weight starting to come back after the implant was removed, which indicates that drug that was being released over the full 4-month duration is still active drug, which is consistent with the pharmacokinetic data that I'm about to show you, in which on the left half of this slide, you can see a very sustained level of drug in the blood of these mice over the full 12-week treatment duration. And devices that are of the same configuration to be studied in our clinical study, which were studied in these mice, have shown in vitro release that's remarkably steady over that 12-week duration, and that's on the right half of this slide. Now, one thing I want to just emphasize is how smooth each device's delivery is. With on the right half of this slide, we have 2 24-hour intervals followed by 1 5-day interval, all measured, and this was at the behest of the FDA, who wanted to see this level of data with 17 devices before they cleared our IND to begin human testing. They were satisfied by the data, which is night and day compared with data that is now public that associated with Intarsia's device with the osmotic pump, where there were much bigger fluctuations from day to day than what we see with our technology. So all of this supports our confidence in moving forward with this drug delivery technology. And lastly, for this program's proof of concept, we have shown in rats a 6-month duration of drug exposure level that we anticipate will be effective in humans from a single administration of the implant. So we're very excited about the potential to move this into clinical studies, which we expect to do shortly, and carry this forward ultimately to an approval and to provide an important option for patients that could benefit. The upcoming human study, which we expect to initiate in the 4th quarter of this year, so just around the corner, will enroll patients who are overweight or obese, and we will titrate these patients on semaglutide injections for the first 8 weeks, and then randomize them to our exenatide implant, to the once-weekly exenatide product that is already marketed. That will allow us to generate some information to support a potentially streamlined approval pathway called a 505(b)(2), referencing the safety data of Bydureon, the once-weekly exenatide product, but we're also going to control this with a semaglutide injection arm so that we can contextualize the tolerability that we see with our implant, as well as potential changes in weight, which will be measured over the course of this study. And lastly, for our clinical and regulatory near-term plan, really the main thing here is we expect to initiate the study in the 4th quarter of this year, and results should be available next year, possibly in the 2nd quarter or middle of next year, but right around the corner. And we're very excited to generate some clinical validation of the technology and data with our lead product that we think could support a very exciting path to the market. Now, let me just quickly transition for a couple of minutes on another program in our pipeline, which utilizes the same test article, but at a different dose, an exenatide implant. But instead of for patients with overweight and obesity, this is for patients with type 2 diabetes, which still represents a compelling value proposition. There are still a large number of people that are living with diabetes, very few who are in good control. And non-adherence to medication is the primary reason for low real-world effectiveness of these treatments. And let me just highlight the adherence of drugs for type 2 diabetes. Ozempic, as an example, it's less than 50% real-world adherence when used for treating type 2 diabetes. But even the easy-to-take daily pills like Januvia or Invokana are still only 50 to 60% real-world adherence. There are a lot of companies developing daily oral GLP-1s right now, which no doubt some of them will make it to the market. But even in that context, an implant that can guarantee adherence over a full 6-month duration, we see as providing a compelling value proposition in that future competitive landscape. In fact, there have been some patient and physician surveys that support the statement that I just made. Here is some data that patients with diabetes who were interviewed in terms of their likelihood to get and use a 6-month exenatide implant. And all of these numbers are very compellingly positive, but in particular, those that were already on a GLP-1 agonist, 56% of them responded that they would likely or definitely get and use an exenatide implant, a 6-month exenatide implant, if it were approved by the FDA, recommended by their physician, and covered by insurance. Interestingly, those already on a GLP-1 were more likely to say that they would use it than those that had never taken a GLP-1, but still 44% is still a very good number when thinking about potential adoption, even for those that are naive to therapy. Now, we've done our own prescriber research and focused primarily in primary care, which is where about 90% of patients receive their treatment. And on a scale of 1 to 10, these prescribers rated an 8.3 as far as how likely they would be to recommend a 6-month exenatide implant. And this is in part because these physicians are already of the belief that those of their patients who are prescribed treatment but are not getting as well as as the physician thinks they should, in many instances, that's probably because the patients are not taking their medicine as prescribed. And that is consistent with all of the population-wide data which has been generated to date. And lastly, I'll mention that payers stand to benefit greatly from a product that guarantees adherence, because non-adherence accounts for about 5,500 unnecessary expenses associated with non-adherence that could be avoided by the patient getting the health benefits of the treatments if only they were to take them regularly and receive the therapeutic doses. So we think we have a compelling value proposition for all of the stakeholders in the systems, for patients, for payers, as well as for physicians, to encourage adoption of this product once it ultimately gets approved. And our near-term plan with this program, we do have an IND cleared in the US to study this in patients with type 2 diabetes, but we are doing the obesity study first, which will begin later this year. And then we'll look to expand our clinical program to include patients with diabetes so that we can ultimately receive that indication as well. There's some financial information here. We have, at the end of last quarter, about $26 million in cash. Our cap table is here, but this is all available publicly. So let me just end with recapping that we are a biopharma company developing miniature subdermal implants, starting with GLP-1 treatments for obesity and diabetes, focused on addressing the problem of non-adherence and tolerability. And we're really excited about the near-term catalyst that we expect with the upcoming clinical study. And with that, I look forward to taking any questions that you may have, and we'll keep you updated as we proceed. Thank you.
Great job, Doctor. Okay, a few questions. Anton asks, what's the closest solution to what you're striving for in the market currently? Is there competition out there?
That's a great question, Anton. There are a number of companies. In fact, there's an increasingly high number of people working on longer acting GLP-1 treatments. all the way from companies developing once monthly versions. Amgen has a compound which has been getting a lot of attention lately called AMG 133, which is a once monthly GLP-1 GIP antagonist. Also just yesterday, a company called Metsera announced data, although they dosed it once weekly in their study, the potential for once monthly dosing for another GLP-1 agonist, and then all the way to a company called Fractal, which is doing gene therapy to basically get someone to consistently produce GLP-1, which of course would be not reversible, but there is a lot of effort in long-acting treatments. However, with an implant that's miniature, other than Intarsia, which I already mentioned, which does not appear to have a path forward, there really isn't anyone else that we know of that's certainly as active as we are in a GLP-1 implant. One thing to just add is that our technology works well with peptides and proteins and larger hydrophilic compounds. There are technologies like that which are in Nexplanon, the contraception implant, that can work with smaller hydrophobic molecules. We're not choosing to initially compete there because of existing technologies, but there really is a gap in technologies that can deliver larger hydrophilic compounds in a steady, non-fluctuating manner that we are trying to fill.
And so Jan asks, is there a different treatment or product for obesity versus diabetes? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so we've defined these based on program names because we're ultimately going to receive a different indication based on how we design the program. And we do expect the dose for obesity to be higher than for diabetes. Generally with GLP-1 agonists, one can achieve compelling glycemic control at a lower dose, but when you get to higher doses, you get linear increases in weight loss more than you see improved glycemic control. So think of Wegovy is the brand name of semaglutide for chronic weight management that Novo Nordisk has, and Ozempic is the brand name for semaglutide for type 2 diabetes. They both utilize the same drug substance, but they're different brand names addressing different indications and different, although overlapping, still different patient populations.
And Harp says, Harp's guessing the material is titanium. Is that correct? And has there been a risk of rejection?
No, the material is titanium, which we selected in part because of its very known long-term biocompatibility. There have been a lot of titanium implants that have been on the market, and we've done our own significant studies with our materials as the result of our manufacturing processes, which ultimately led the FDA to clear our IND with this test article. But it's not rejected. It's actually, there's a capsule that forms that keeps it isolated from the rest of the body, and it allows it to maintain no toxicity, and it's very well accepted by the body.
And Sullivan, asks, what would it take to clog a nanotube? Is that a possibility for it to get clogged? In the current configuration, we do not see clogging happening either in vitro or in vivo. What I can say is that early on in our development, there have been configurations where clogging has shown to occur, but we've made changes to prevent that from happening. So as of now, the risk of clogging is extremely low. We have not seen it a single time in the current configuration, and we've tested a large number. It is a good question. It's something we're very cognizant of, and we certainly don't want to release product that will stop working for patients. And so we will demonstrate that these products will not fail before they're ultimately made available. And Neil asks, what is the maintenance required? Is it permanent?
So once every 6 months is what we are going to seek an indication for. At the 6-month interval, it would be expected that the patient would go to get their implant removed and get another one replaced, presumably as part of the same appointment that they would go to get monitored for their care anyways, to leverage them already going to the doctor. If someone were to not go in, then what would happen is it would just slowly taper over time, but we would certainly initially indicate it for it to be removed after that interval for which we have demonstrated safety and efficacy.
And last question due to time, Coop asks, with clinical trials towards the end of the year, what does the trial timeline to approval look like?
So as far as timeline to approval, we haven't given public guidance with a specific year. However, because the drug substance is already in approved products, we are expecting to build a scientific bridge to the already marketed product by Durian, which should significantly lessen the time to an approval that would typically be the case for a new chemical entity, using what's called the 505(b)(2) pathway. We still expect that there's going to be probably 2 more trials after this one, but ultimately we are hoping to avoid a pre-approval outcome study. Many of these drugs require thousands of patients over multiple years for safety outcomes to be measured before approval. We expect and hope not to be required to do that based on the conversations we have had with the FDA, but still to independently demonstrate efficacy, which would require a 26-week study as an example for diabetes, and probably a year-long study for weight loss as we go forward. And as we have more clarity, we'll provide more public guidance on expectations for approval. But it's going to be a middle ground between a generic and a new chemical entity.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for this very thorough and exciting presentation. We appreciate you joining us on the conference. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you for having me.
All right. We'll see you again soon. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back.